For 6 years, my wife carried 2 foil pans out of our kitchen on the first Sunday of every month. One went to someone assigned by the meal ministry at St. Matthew's. The second, she said, went into the church freezer for whichever family needed it next. I never questioned why one pan had a printed label and the other was marked only in Claire's handwriting. Then she sprained her wrist, and I offered to drive. The printed label said Miss Doyle, for B.No. Dairy, the handwritten one said Dad, N.O. Onions. Love, Claire. Both of Claire's parents had been dead for more than a decade. When I asked who Dad was, she pulled the pan against her chest with her good arm and said, an old man from church. He calls half the volunteers family. Her answer could have been true. The way she refused to let me carry the pan made it feel rehearsed. I put Mrs. Doyle's meal in the back of my truck and left the other one on our counter. I can take both, I said. You shouldn't be driving with that brace. Claire glanced at the clock above the stove. Walter expects me. It was the first time I heard the name. Then give me his address. Patrick, please don't turn a nice thing into an interrogation. She slid the pan into an insulated carrier, took her keys, and walked out before I decided whether stopping her would be concern or control. I drove to St. Matthew's alone. I had been married to Claire for 22 years. I coordinated maintenance for 3 apartment complexes, and Claire handled regional accounts for a grocery chain. Most of our arguments were about schedules, not trust. That morning, she had looked frightened. The meal coordinator, Janice Lowe, met me beside a folding table in the parish hall. She checked Mrs. Doyle's name on a paper list and thanked me for covering Claire's route. I asked whether Walter had been added to the month's assignments. Janice ran one finger down the page. Walter Burke, she said. I told her I did not know his last name. Claire used to deliver to a Walter Burke after his hip surgery, but that was years ago. Once the formal deliveries ended, they stayed friendly. Did he call her his daughter? Janice looked at me for a second too long. I heard him call her Claire. She did not offer more. I delivered Mrs. Doyle's pan, returned the empty carrier to the church, and drove home expecting Claire's car to be gone. It was in the driveway. She sat at the kitchen table with the brace removed and an ice pack across her wrist. The second pan was gone. Did Walter get his dinner? I asked. Yes. Who is he? I told you. You gave me a category. I asked for a person. Claire closed her eyes. His son and I volunteered together when Walter was recovering. They don't have much family nearby. I kept checking on him after the program ended. What is his son's name? Ethan. Does Ethan call you family too? She stood so quickly the ice pack fell. You are angry because I fed an elderly man. I'm angry because you have been writing Dad on food in our kitchen and carrying it to someone I have never heard of. She picked up the ice pack and held it against her wrist again. My own father was gone. Walter was kind to me. I knew you would make it strange. I wanted to defend myself against a version of me she had just introduced, but there was a piece of truth inside it. I disliked church committees and often complained when volunteer projects became permanent obligations. She had heard those complaints as proof I would not understand a bond that began there. For the next hour, I let myself believe this was hidden caregiving, not a hidden relationship. That explanation still hurt, but it fit the woman who kept freezer instructions on index cards and bought foil pans by the case. I want to meet Walter, I said. Why? Because you call him Dad. He calls me his daughter. There's a difference. Then he can explain the difference. Claire pressed the ice pack harder against her wrist. Ethan is protective. He'll think you're accusing them of something. Are they being accused of something? No. She answered too fast. I asked whether she had ever stayed overnight at Walter's house. She said only during his recovery, when other volunteers also took shifts. I asked whether Ethan was married. She said he had been divorced for years. Then she stopped answering and told me my suspicion was making a generous relationship ugly. I slept badly and woke before dawn to find the insulated carrier washed and drying beside the sink. Its zippered outside pocket bulged. When I moved it so I could make coffee, a blue folder slid out and opened on the floor. The cover read Burke Family Care, Walter/Ethan/Mara/Claire. I did not read the pages. I did not need to open a folder that had announced more than Claire had told me. I placed it on the table and waited. At 6:30, she entered in her robe, saw the folder, and stopped. "It fell out," I said. "I didn't go through it." She picked it up and held it against her chest. "Mara is Ethan's sister. We coordinate groceries and appointments." "Why are you listed with the children?" "Because I help." "Why isn't the church listed?" "Because this is private now." "How private?" Claire walked upstairs without answering. 20 minutes later, she came down dressed for work even though it was Monday and her supervisor had approved remote work for her wrist. She put the folder in her tote. I asked for Ethan's number. She said no. I asked whether he knew she was married to me. "He knows about you." That sentence carried exactly enough precision to be dangerous. "What does he know?" "That we still share a house." "Does he know we share a bedroom?" She looked toward the stairs. "We're late." There was no one else in the house and no appointment we shared. I said her name. She reached for the door, and I stepped between her and it. The moment I did, I hated the shape of the scene. I moved aside at once. "I'm not keeping you here," I said. "But leaving is an answer too." She drove away. I called my sister Beth, not because she knew anything about Claire's Sundays, but because I needed someone to tell me whether I was turning a casserole label into a crime. Beth listened and asked the question I had avoided. "If Walter is only a father figure, why can't you know Ethan?" I had no answer. Beth told me not to follow Claire, enter anyone's house, or start calling elderly people. I saved the kitchen camera frame that showed the folder cover after it fell. Both Claire and I administered the backdoor camera. That evening, Claire returned after 9 with an urgent care band around her wrist. I asked whether she had also seen Ethan. "I am not doing this tonight." "Did you?" She stared at me, then said, "Yes. I told him you were upset about Walter." "What did he say?" "He said you would calm down." "Has he met me?" "No." "Then how does he know what I do?" Claire turned away. I said, "Tell me the sentence you used when you explained our marriage to him." She gripped the counter with her uninjured hand. "We have been unhappy a long time." That wasn't my question. I said we function more like housemates. In the last year, we had refinished our bedroom, booked a trip to Maine, and spent nearly every Friday sharing takeout on the sofa. We argued. We had gone months without sex during her mother's illness and again after my back surgery. We were not housemates, and we had never agreed that we were separated. "How long have you been telling him that?" I asked. "I need time to explain." "How long?" "It didn't start the way you think." I felt the room narrow around the foil pan boxes stacked on top of the refrigerator. "How long, Claire?" "Almost 7 years." She began crying before I understood whether she had admitted an affair or a lie about our marriage. I asked one more direct question. "Are you sleeping with him?" She nodded. I sat at the kitchen table because my knees had become unreliable. Claire said Ethan and Walter were not bad people, as if I had accused them. She said the relationship began after months of helping with Walter's recovery, that Ethan believed our marriage had been ending for years, and that she had kept postponing the formal separation because there was never a clean time. "You baked 2 meals in my kitchen every month and took one to the man you were sleeping with." "It was for Walter." "That doesn't make the pan innocent." She said she would sleep in the guest room and give me whatever facts I needed after she spoke to a lawyer. I told her I was not agreeing to secrecy, housing, money, or contact rules while she controlled the facts. I would talk to counsel too. She packed a small bag and went to a hotel without my asking her to leave. At 11:30, my phone rang from a number I did not know. The man said, "Is this Patrick Nolan?" I said yes. "This is Ethan Burke. Claire says you found the care schedule." His voice was lower and less confident than I expected. She says you and she have been separated inside the house since 2018. We have never been separated. Silence lasted long enough for me to hear him breathing. She said you kept the house jointly because selling would hurt both of you, he said. She said you knew about me. I learned your name yesterday. Ethan swore under his breath. Then he asked, did Claire ever tell you she had been married before? She told me she had been engaged once. Ethan said, Patrick, I wasn't her fiancé. I was her husband. I did not believe Ethan until he gave me the county and year. I searched the public court index while he remained on the phone. Claire Marie Hart v. Ethan James Burke, dissolution granted 26 years earlier. Claire had married Ethan at 19, divorced him at 22, and met me 3 years later. In 22 years of marriage, she had described him as a college boyfriend who left after one semester. She never said his surname. She never said Walter had once been her legal father-in-law. Does Walter know she's married to me? I asked. Ethan said Walter believed Claire and I had been separated for almost 7 years and that the divorce was delayed by the house and insurance. He thinks she came back to us, Ethan said. The word back changed the scale of everything. This was not only a second relationship growing beside our marriage. Claire had restored a family role she had erased from the history she gave me. Ethan and I agreed not to call Walter that night. He was 79, recovering from another fall, and did not need 2 men forcing a marital timeline into his bedroom. We also agreed that neither of us would contact Claire for 1 hour. Neither of us called it an alliance. We just needed 1 hour in which Claire was not translating between us. Ethan asked whether I would meet him the next morning at a coffee shop halfway between our towns. I said I would bring only information I could lawfully share, proof of my current marriage, the visible folder cover, and dates from my own calendar. He said he would bring his divorce decree, the care schedule Claire had given him, and messages relevant to what she claimed about me. I slept less than an hour. Claire texted twice from the hotel. The first message said, I know you are hurt, the second said, please do not involve Walter until we can explain this carefully. She did not say Ethan had been her husband. I replied that I would communicate only about the house, immediate health questions, and arranging a factual conversation after legal advice. At the coffee shop, Ethan arrived carrying a red accordion file. He was 49, broad-shouldered, and exhausted. He showed me a certified copy of the old decree. The marriage lasted 2 years and 8 months. Claire filed after Ethan accepted a construction job in Texas without consulting her. He returned to western Pennsylvania after his own second marriage failed. 7 years earlier, Walter broke his hip. St. Matthew's Meal Ministry paired Claire with the Burke house because she volunteered near their neighborhood. She recognized Walter's name on the assignment sheet and made the first delivery without telling either of us. Walter opened the door and called her by the nickname she used at 19. Ethan arrived from the pharmacy while she was still in the kitchen. Claire later told me they had worked together as ordinary volunteers. Ethan said the affair began 4 months after that first meal. He believed Claire and I were already sleeping separately and negotiating the sale of our house. She said I was decent but emotionally finished, that we did not want lawyers to consume the equity, and that I had agreed she could rebuild her personal life quietly. I showed Ethan photographs from the same period, Claire and me painting our bedroom, cutting a cake on our 20th anniversary, and standing in Maine the previous fall. Ethan looked at the Maine photograph for a long time. Claire had told him she spent that week helping my sister after surgery. Beth had not had surgery. Ethan opened the care schedule. It was a 24-page binder printed each January, with appointments, meal rotations, home maintenance tasks, birthdays, and emergency instructions. Ethan and Mara handled legal and medical decisions. Claire handled most Sunday meals, clothing purchases, holiday cards, and the freezer inventory. Nothing in the binder gave her authority she did not legally have. The deception lived in the relationship labels. On the contact page she was Claire Burke, daughter-in-law, beside her cell number was the furnished apartment complex she had described as her residence. She had told him I retained the marital home and she rented nearby, then explained every overnight at our house as maintenance, insurance, or an attempt to keep the divorce civil. She leaves your place every first Sunday, he asked. I described the 2 pans. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face. Walter received one. The other gave Claire a real church delivery, a coordinator who expected her, and a reason for the smell of food in her car. On some months the church assignment ended at noon and the Burke meal began at 1. So you saw one labeled pan leave for church, Ethan said. And when the carrier smelled like dinner, you already had an answer. He was right. Claire had not invented the meal ministry, she had placed a second route beside it and counted on the first one to answer every question. Ethan's messages showed the rest of the system. Claire spent one Saturday a month at Walter's house, usually while I believed she was organizing the church pantry. She attended his birthdays, helped Mara prepare holiday cards, and joined family dinners on evenings she told me the grocery chain was closing quarterly accounts. During 3 weekend trips, she told me she was at women's ministry retreats and told Ethan she finally had weekends free because I was visiting Beth. I was home for 2 of them. Claire had called from hotel hallways and said the retreat sessions ran late. Ethan had saved photographs of her at Walter's kitchen table, asleep on a sofa with a book across her chest, and standing beside him at a minor league baseball game. None were explicit. Their ordinariness did more damage than a hotel receipt would have. He showed me one picture from Walter's 75th birthday. Claire stood between Ethan and Walter with a hand on each man's shoulder. A sheet cake said the Burke family, still together. I recognized the navy dress I had zipped for her before she left our house to attend what she called an employee retirement dinner. Did you call her your wife? I asked. Not legally. Not after what happened the first time. But people assumed, and she never corrected them. I almost laughed at the precision. Claire had built 2 lives using technically narrower words than the conclusions she wanted others to draw. Ethan asked about money. I could not access Claire's individual account, but we each contributed fixed amounts to joint expenses and kept the rest separate. Ethan believed she paid for Walter's meals from a ministry reimbursement and personal funds. The church did not reimburse volunteers. We marked the question for proper disclosure instead of turning guesses into theft. Then Ethan showed me the section that changed his version too. It was titled after Walter. He had written it with Claire 18 months earlier, after Walter said he might eventually choose an independent living apartment. The page was not a lease, deed, or wedding plan. It was a list of promises. Claire would file for divorce within 30 days of Walter choosing a move date. Ethan would stop accepting her overnight visits until she had a separate legal address. They would attend counseling before sharing a home. Beside the first item, Claire had written Patrick understands the timing. I had never heard of the plan. Why attach your future to Walter moving? I asked. Ethan stared down at the page. She said a divorce during his recovery would make him blame himself. She said once he was stable, she could tell everyone without hurting him. And if he stayed in his house? Then we waited. The care system had become more than cover. It gave Claire a compassionate reason to delay a decision in both relationships. With me, Walter's needs explained the volunteer hours but not the affair. With Ethan, those same needs explained why she could not become fully available. Walter's recovery was real, which made every postponed promise sound humane. Ethan said Walter had toured an apartment 6 months earlier, then decided he was not ready. Claire encouraged him not to rush. Ethan had thanked her for protecting his father. I thought of Claire returning from that same Saturday and telling me the church was short of freezer space. What I had mistaken for volunteer frustration may have been relief that Walter had preserved her schedule. Did she want him to stay dependent? Ethan asked. Neither of us could answer that fairly. We could say only that his decision preserved the arrangement and that Claire had supported it without telling either household what else depended on it. I called a family law attorney named Simone Park from the parking lot. Simone told me to preserve jointly accessible statements, avoid moving unusual sums, arrange medical testing, and stop building a private case from records I had no right to enter. She also warned me not to treat an old divorce decree as proof of a current marriage. Claire and Ethan were legally former spouses. I returned home in the afternoon. Claire's hotel bag was gone from the bedroom, but most of her clothes remained. She had emailed proposed times to collect work items and suggested that we maintain ordinary bill payments while we sought advice. I agreed. Then I saw the stack of unused foil pans above the refrigerator and counted 47, because counting was easier than imagining 7 years of first Sundays. Beth came over and stopped me midway through writing dates on a legal pad. "You know enough for tonight," she said. I told her about the first marriage. She sat across from me and whispered, "She let all of us believe you were her only husband." Beth remembered a box marked college that Claire had refused to open when they cleared her parents' house. We agreed not to search it. I put the legal pad away. That evening, Claire emailed one sentence, "Ethan told me you met." I replied, "Yes." She called immediately. "He showed you our divorce papers?" "He did. I should have told you. Before our wedding would have been a good time." I was ashamed. For 22 years. At first. Later I didn't know how to explain why I had waited. I asked whether she had resumed calling Walter Dad before or after she resumed sleeping with Ethan. Claire said before. So the family came first. It isn't that clean. Nothing you made is clean. My voice rose. Beth touched my arm, and I lowered it. Claire said she wanted to explain in person. I told her the first meeting would cover dates, health risk, money, what each household had been told, and what she intended now. It would not be a contest between two men or a performance for Walter. She agreed to meet at our house the next afternoon with Beth present. Before hanging up, she said, "Patrick, what I had with you was real." I looked at the 47 pans over the refrigerator. "Then tomorrow you can explain why reality needed a second label." Claire arrived wearing the wrist brace and carrying the blue folder. Beth stayed in the living room within sight but not at the table. She admitted the current relationship began 6 years and 8 months earlier, 4 months after the meal delivery reunited her with Ethan. Protection had been inconsistent during the first year. She had spent money on meals, clothing for Walter, family trips, gifts, and part of 2 hotel weekends. She did not know the total. "Why did you tell me Ethan was a college boyfriend?" I asked. "Because saying ex-husband would have changed how you heard every story. It would have changed whether I married you." Claire stared at the table. "I thought you would see me as somebody who quit when marriage got hard. So you let me promise myself to someone with a history you edited for my approval." She said she had intended to tell me after our honeymoon, then after our first anniversary, then when we bought the house, with each milestone raising the cost of the last omission. By the time her parents died, she had become the only person left who carried the version of her life she gave me. "Except Ethan," I said. "And Walter. And Mara." Claire flinched. I asked why she returned to them. Claire said seeing Walter at the door had collapsed 26 years. In the Burke kitchen, she was 19 again, before her parents treated the divorce as a public failure and before she decided the easiest way to move forward was to describe the marriage as an engagement. Walter had never blamed her. He hugged her, asked about her work, and remembered that she hated raw tomatoes. And Ethan? He apologized for leaving. I apologized for refusing to go. We kept talking. Then you started sleeping together. Yes. She looked toward Beth and back at me. It felt like getting a piece of myself back. You took 7 years of my life to recover it. Claire started to answer, stopped, and removed the brace because her fingers had swollen. Her hands shook as she set it beside the folder. I asked what Ethan meant by the rental house. She admitted she told him our home had been divided informally and that she leased a small place nearby. The address she gave him belonged to a furnished apartment complex used by her company for visiting auditors. Claire knew the address from travel packets, but she had never leased or stayed in a unit. She sometimes met Ethan in the public lobby before they drove elsewhere. He had seen her walk out of it often enough that he stopped asking to see an apartment. Did anyone at work help you? No. Did you use company money or records? No. Did you tell Ethan I approved the affair? Not in those words. Which words? Claire said she told him I knew the marriage was over and preferred not to discuss outside relationships. I pushed my chair back so hard it struck the wall. Beth stood but did not come closer. I wanted Claire to look frightened by my anger, then hated myself for wanting it. I set the chair upright and moved to the other end of the table. You used my silence in a conversation I never knew existed. I know. No. You know now that I heard about it. We paused until both of us could speak normally. I asked about Walter's care. Claire opened the blue folder. She had cooked, driven, organized clothing, and covered weekends when Ethan or Mara could not. The contact page lay open between us, with Walter's number beneath Ethan's. Walter knew she and I still shared a house but believed we had separate lives. He believed I had chosen not to meet him. Claire admitted she told him I resented the Burke family because of the first marriage and wanted no contact. He thinks I punished an old man for knowing you before I did. He thinks you wanted distance. You made distance look like my decision. Claire said Walter asked several times whether he should call or send a card. She discouraged him because I might respond badly. I stood and walked to the sink. For years, a Christmas card had arrived addressed only to Claire in block handwriting. She said it came from a church recipient who disliked writing surnames. I had carried those envelopes from our mailbox and placed them beside her plate. Walter had been trying to thank a man he believed had refused him. I picked up my phone and typed Walter's number from the open page before Claire or Beth could stop me, needing to correct my assigned role before thinking about what the correction would cost him. He answered on the fourth ring. I said, Mr. Burke, this is Patrick Nolan, Claire's husband. Walter went silent. Then he said, I know who you are. Do you know Claire and I have never been separated? Claire covered her mouth. Walter asked me to repeat myself. His breathing changed. Ethan took the phone a minute later and told me Walter needed to sit down. I apologized and ended the call. Beth said quietly, that truth had to reach him. It didn't have to reach him like that. She was right. Claire began crying and accused me of using Walter to punish her. I told her anger had made me careless, but Walter's distress did not restore her right to manage what he knew. The meeting ended because no useful answer would survive the next 10 minutes. Claire took the folder and returned to the hotel. I called Ethan and apologized directly. He was furious, not because the fact was false, but because I had delivered it without warning while Walter was alone in his den. You wanted him to know you weren't the bad guy, Ethan said. You didn't care what room he was in when you proved it. I said he was right. We agreed all future contact concerning Walter would go through Ethan or Mara unless Walter chose otherwise. That night, I wrote Walter a short letter. I did not explain the affair or defend 22 years of marriage. I apologized for the abrupt call, stated that I had never known about the Burke family, and told him he owed me no response. I sent it through Ethan. The next morning, Claire emailed that she would provide a written timeline and full financial disclosure. She also said Walter had asked her not to visit until he understood what had happened. For the first time, the hidden family had set a boundary she did not control. The medical tests eventually required no further care. Financial Review identified $29,600 in relationship-linked spending across nearly 7 years. Most came from Claire's individual account after agreed household contributions. Just under $8,000 affected shared money through grocery purchases, hotel charges described as church travel, and household supplies moved to Walter's home. There was no secret debt, property, lease, company expense, forged signature, or legal authority over Walter. Claire's written timeline did more. It showed that the first Sunday deliveries were only the spine. She called Walter every Wednesday from her drive home, attended 9 birthdays, 5 Thanksgiving breakfasts, and 4 summer baseball weekends, and stayed overnight at the Burke house 16 times. She told me those nights were retreats, inventory closings, or weather delays. Ethan believed she stayed at the furnished apartment when she returned to my city. The document also showed 3 occasions when Claire shortened visits with Walter to keep plans with me, protecting whichever promise was closest to breaking. Ethan ended the romantic relationship after receiving the same timeline. He sent one message, I knew she was legally married. I believed your relationship was over. I should have required proof before building around that belief, I did not reply. Walter chose to speak with Claire once, with Mara present. I was not there. Mara later sent me a note, with Walter's permission, saying he had asked 3 questions: whether Claire had loved Patrick, whether Patrick had known about them, and whether she had encouraged him to remain at home because moving would force her decision. Claire answered yes, no, and I don't know. Walter told her that not knowing was not enough for him to continue calling her his daughter. He ended the care schedule and asked his children to arrange help without Claire. Her name disappeared from the binder, and Walter had to reorganize ordinary parts of his week. Claire and I attended 2 discernment sessions. In the first, she said she loved the steadiness of our marriage and the recovered self she felt with the Burkes. The counselor asked, "Who knew they were getting only one part of you?" Claire looked at me, then down at her hands. "No one," she said. In the second, I admitted I still wanted an explanation that would rank the lives. If she loved me more, perhaps I could call the affair an illness. If she loved Ethan more, perhaps I could call our marriage theft. Claire refused the ranking. "I loved you differently," she said. "That's true and useless," I answered. I told her I would file for divorce. She nodded, then asked whether I had already decided before counseling. "I decided I would not remain married without facts," I said. "Counseling showed me facts won't make remaining possible." Claire did not argue. At home, I opened the cabinet where we kept the insulated carriers. There were 2 large ones and 1 small one. I put Claire's carriers with the property she would collect. I kept the small one we had used before the meal ministry expanded. I washed it even though it was already clean, dried it, and returned it to the back of the cabinet. The divorce took 11 months. Claire rented an apartment near her office and kept her job. I refinanced the house after an appraisal and paid her share of the equity through the mediated agreement. We divided retirement accounts, furniture, and tools. The 47 foil pans stayed above the refrigerator. Claire took none of the pans. She said she could not look at them. I donated the unopened packages to St. Matthew's without explaining why. Janice accepted them and said Claire had resigned by email after arranging for Mrs. Doyle's next delivery to be covered. She asked whether any ministry recipient had been left without food. I said no. Every scheduled name had been covered. On the clipboard, Mrs. Doyle's name sat among 12 others who knew nothing about the second label. For a moment I wanted to tell Janice enough that she would understand why the pans made me angry. Instead, I said, "Please keep the recipients out of whatever you hear." She nodded and slid the unopened packages beneath the folding table with the ordinary supplies. My relationship with Beth became easier and harder at once. When she asked where I had gone on a Saturday, I said, "Why do you need to know?" She stared at me across her dining table. "Because you borrowed my truck." We both laughed, then I apologized. Ethan contacted me only twice after the divorce began. The first time, he confirmed Walter had received my letter. The second, he said Walter was moving to a senior apartment after all. I asked whether Claire knew. Ethan said Walter had chosen not to tell her before the move. He doesn't want the date turned into a promise, he said. I wished Walter well and did not ask for the address. Claire learned about the move later from Mara. During mediation, she said losing Walter felt like a second divorce. I said only, he gets to decide what contact costs him. She agreed. That did not reconcile them. 6 months after the divorce became final, Walter mailed a note to the house. He had kept the return address from my apology letter. His handwriting was unsteady but readable. "Patrick, I am sorry I believed you chose not to know us. I also believed what was easiest for my family. Thank you for correcting it, though I wish the first call had been kinder. I am settled now. No reply is needed." I read it twice, then put it in the same drawer as my copy of the divorce decree without replying. Claire and I spoke once outside mediation after that. We met at the house for her final property pickup. Claire opened the college box herself so we could confirm it held only her belongings. Under old notebooks was a small envelope of pictures from her wedding to Ethan. She had carried them, unopened, through 3 moves. In one photograph, 19-year-old Claire stood beside Walter, both laughing as wind lifted her veil. I handed her the envelope without asking to keep or destroy anything. I used to think if I told you about that marriage, it would become the first thing you saw, she said. So you made sure I could never see it at all. I know. Walter doesn't answer my calls, she said. You know I can't help with that. I wasn't asking you to. We carried the last box to her car. Before leaving, she said, the meals were real. I thought of Mrs. Doyle, Walter, Ethan, the church freezer, and 2 labels drying on our counter. I know, I said. That's why I never looked at the second label. Claire nodded and drove away. The next week, I found one of her plastic freezer labels stuck beneath the kitchen drawer. It said only Sunday 1, I threw it away and went to work. My routines changed slowly. I stopped buying groceries in quantities meant for 2 people. For months, I still looked up and saw their shape in the empty space. On first Sundays, I woke expecting garlic and tomato sauce in the kitchen. Sometimes I missed the smell before I remembered what it had covered. I did not volunteer for the meal ministry, but I kept cooking the meals I already knew how to make. The small insulated carrier stayed at the back of the cabinet until I had an honest reason to use it. Nearly a year after the divorce, Beth had knee surgery. She refused to stay with me and insisted she could manage in her own apartment. On the second day, she admitted stairs were harder than she expected and asked me to bring dinner. I made 1 pan of baked pasta, left out the mushrooms she hated, and wrote Beth, Tuesday across the lid. Before driving over, I stood at the counter with the marker still in my hand. There was no second pan. No unexplained address. No story about where I was going. Beth opened her door on crutches and said, You remembered the mushrooms. I handed her the carrier and said, I remembered who this was for.